The following program is made possible by Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
It's not a national election year, but it sure feels like one, with presidential candidates crisscrossing the nation and dominating the news.
We talked to our political dynamic duo, Whalen and Marinucci, or is it Marinucci and Whalen, about a campaign already in full sprint. The game is politics. The game is on. I'm Mark Simon.
And I'm Kevin Mullen. Welcome to the game. 17 Republicans are running for president, and each of them seems intent on out-Trumping Donald Trump. Meanwhile, the most prominent Democratic candidate is a self-described socialist who seems intent on pushing Hillary Clinton to the left.
We could have them on every week. They're just that good. Our political dynamic duo of Bill Whalen, Hoover Institution fellow and GOP political commentator and writer, and the San Francisco Chronicle's legendary Carla Marinucci. Thank you both for being here.
Good to be here.
It seems like it's like we're all on a cable station. It's the Trump cable station. It's all Trump all the time, and the impact he's having on everybody else, Bill. It seems like we're not the only ones who are noticing it's all Trump all the time.
That's for sure. So he leaves his show on NBC and he manages to get even more airtime despite leaving a network. He is just simply taking the oxygen out of the room for other Republicans. Rick Perry gave a really thoughtful speech. Not words you hear often, Rick Perry, and thoughtful necessarily, but he gave what was actually, honestly, a very thoughtful speech about race relations in the United States of America. Nobody covered it. Why? Because who knows what Trump was doing that day, but that's where the circus was. So the circus follows, and this is the challenge for the Republicans moving forward with this man, plain and simple. Where he goes, so goes the news cycle. So how do you engage with him? Some candidates have decided, I'm going to attack Trump. It's the plover strategy, the plover being that bird that feeds off crocodiles. I'll feed off Trump by attacking Trump, therefore I'll get attention de facto. Others have said, well, I'm going to be nice to Trump. Why? It's the Ted Cruz strategy, because eventually he's going to crash and burn. I'll inherit his supporters. And then other Republicans are just sort of waiting for Trump to implode. But again, where Trump goes, so goes the news cycle.
And Carla, from a media perspective, how hard is it not to do that?
I mean, this is so interesting because, you know, this isn't his first rodeo doing this. I rode around on Trump 1 with him in 1999 when he ran for president as a Reform Party candidate. Why he's getting this much attention this time around is so interesting, and I think it's because maybe voters are just up to here with politicians who they feel are too scripted, you know, just too overblown, raising too much money. And Trump comes out and says, I am who I am, and I don't need your money, I'm rich.
It's the Popeye theme, I am what I am.
And I think that that's what's driving it.
You know, it's one of the great fictional devices in American movies, which is that there's this straight-shooting guy who's an outsider who captures the nation's attention, and because he just tells it like it is. And instead, we've got Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, who's like the grumpy uncle at Thanksgiving, who won't shut up railing against Medicare for an hour.
Well, not so much the issue. I'm not so much sure the issue is that he tells it like it is, but it's because he's just not one of them. And as Kevin mentioned in the introduction, you know, the most scintillating Democrat this summer has been someone who's not even a registered member of the Democratic Party. I think Carla's right. There is a just palpable frustration that voters in both parties have with the party establishment, with the media, with the way that campaigns are run, the way that candidates act. And both of these gentlemen, Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, are cashing in on it. But I think with Trump, this is what's worth watching. At some point, the shtick slows down and you actually have to start being a candidate, at which time you'll be asked questions about where you are on positions. And we've already seen in the past few days that Trump has, you know, stumbled all over immigration. He's gone from the, you know, comments he made about people coming into Mexico to actually trying to say what he thinks about a pathway to citizenship. And he just really hasn't thought out the issue, as I suspect he'll be on the economy and all the issues. It's very easy for Donald Trump to apprentice style say, well, I cut deals. I know how to sit down and bargain with people. It doesn't work that way. You actually have to have policy positions.
But is that really the case? Because we all covered the recall election with a governor, Schwarzenegger, and I don't recall him getting terribly substantive beyond a series of buzz phrases.
Arnold Schwarzenegger had George Shultz as an advisor. He had Warren Buffett. He had very actually thought out economic strategies, healthcare strategy. He actually came with a policy portfolio, but it was Arnold's personality and the celebrity factor that outweighs. But again, I just think with Trump, we'll just see how far the celebrity thrill of it can go.
I do think there's some parallels between the Arnold and Trump phenomena in that straight talking, I don't need your money, but and a lot of us covering that recall, we had heard he's going to run for a long time, and all of us were saying, yeah, right, and then going around and watching these crowds show up for him. I think Trump has that potential still, but you're right. Arnold had the difference of a bunch of people, including Mike Murphy, his campaign strategist, who were helping him wade through. And Donald Trump is like his own guy.
And one of the differences, this is what I think Kevin can speak to very well, you run for an office, at the end of the day, you have to be, in a word, likable. People have to accept you as a person, like you as a person, be willing to trust you at that job. Donald Trump is not necessarily likable when you get down to it. People may envy the wealth. They may envy the fact that he's on TV and that he's a celebrity, but he's not fundamentally a likable guy. He's a bully at the end of the day. But here he is driving up the polls, doing just the opposite of what we're told politicians to do. Be likable, Donald. No, instead he goes out on a fence.
It's got a little bit of a summer blockbuster feel that will fade by the fall. What's interesting is, it seems as though there's a ceiling there in the 20% range, something like that, which means 80% of Republicans aren't going to go for this guy. My question is, if he becomes real and is deemed a real front runner as we get closer to Iowa and New Hampshire, and the media starts to really vet him and really drill down, will that hurt his candidacy, or will he actually benefit by taking on the media? Because Newt Gingrich had a spike by taking on the media.
I think that's a very good question, because so far, by taking on the media, he's won. I mean, on those McCain comments, you thought that was going to blow back at him. The media called him on it. He went even farther in the polls. He doubled down. I think it's him versus the media. And as we know, the polls show we're not that popular either. No. So he's using that to great effect. And we've had a little bit of a conflict in the media. How do we cover this guy? Originally, it looked like a marketing campaign for the Trump name and Hollywood and so forth. And now it's real. You have to really sort of consider there are voters out there watching this, and we have to examine lawsuits, issues, all kinds of other aspects.
But I think the media have a choice here. They can either sort of go to the tabloid side of things with Trump. For example, the Daily Beast article, which talked about he and Ariana, or his first wife, which got in the question of rape and so forth. Or they can actually go into the fact that here's a guy who's gone 180 degrees on abortion, gone 180 degrees on taxes, 180 degrees on Hillary Clinton, and just point out the inconsistency. So it's, in one respect, Trump is sort of a test of voters' maturity, but he's also a test of the media's maturity as well.
There's a great line from Groucho Marx: I have principles. If you don't like those, I have others. Meanwhile, his impact on the other candidates has been profound. A rhetorical arms race. Some, as you alluded to earlier, Bill, some of them are seeing if they can out-Trump Trump. And the result is that they're saying things that's a little hard to believe are really going to appeal to mainstream voters outside a really small group of hardcore conservatives in the Republican Party. So what does he end up doing to some of the rest of the field?
I agree with you. Going into this debate, they had to, number of polls are going to be weighed, who makes it in the top 10, and I think it's been sort of Crazyville in last week, as they all try to do the soundbite. And some of them on a couple of the issues, Planned Parenthood, I think, being one of them, where every day you're seeing that just unbelievable attention to this issue, which I think has the potential to maybe essentially backfire, particularly with women voters. But I don't know where it stops, because the question is, once they get on the stage and we know he's going to be there, how do these other guys, and it looks like it's going to be all guys, handle this guy? Well, how do they deal with him on that stage on Thursday night? It's going to be must-watch TV.
My advice for what it's worth would be this: do not attack him personally. You can say that I disagree with many things this candidate said, but let's also recognize one of the reasons why he's getting support, and then get in this issue of why people are tired of politics. I think the sweet spot, if we want to call it that, in the Republican primaries right now is the candidate who can run not only as a conservative with some actual honest-to-goodness principles and ideas, but also can position him or herself as outside of Washington. So that's the person I want to be on that debate stage, somebody who's going to take the frustration that Trump voters have and feed off it if and when Trump finally burns.
you've got people like Huckabee talking about taking Jews to the ovens. I mean,
Right.
I mean, none of that can be good overall for the party and its reputation.
A lot of this, I mean, we're talking about a lot of things that have, a 1-week lifespan ultimately. We're not going to be talking 6 months from now about what Mike Huckabee said in July and August of 2015. So a lot of that you just have to slough off. And again, I think this is what's required in way of discipline if you're a Jeb Bush, if you're a Scott Walker or Marco Rubio, the gentlemen who we seem to agree are at the top tier of this field. You just have to concentrate on your own campaign right now. Get your money together, get your message together, because there is a appetite of vulnerability. Kevin was asking before we started, why are there 17 Republicans running right now? I could answer quite crudely. It's the equivalent of that question about why dogs do something, because they can. But the answer...
It's cable, you can probably say.
Exactly. Well, maybe a podcast. We'll go RNX. But no, the answer is that there is this gigantic void within the Republican Party. There is no front runner. This is a situation Republicans are not used to. Republicans thrive on order. And going back to Ronald Reagan, the order of the process has been somebody who was the runner-up the last time enters the next cycle with the most money, the most organization. It's their last hurrah, the best narrative going, and they get it by hook or crook. This time around, that doesn't exist. Compound that with the fact that there's built-in frustration within the party over the end of the George W. Bush presidency, the fecklessness of the McCain campaign, the fecklessness of the Romney campaign. That's why I think you see people dogpiling into this. It's not so much I think they see Hillary Clinton as a wounded creature. I think it's just because there's just this vast opening within the Republicans looking for any form of leadership right now.
We're going to take a break. Stick around, and you stay with us. We'll be right back.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Welcome back to the game. He's Kevin Mullen. I'm Mark Simon. Over here we have Bill Whalen and Carla Marinucci, our political dynamic duo. This is being taped just before the Republican debate, food fight, water balloon fight. And so we assume all 17 are not going to be in the debate, which is probably a blessing to everybody, including the nation. So who's in the top tier? Who do you think we'll be talking about by the end of this year still? Bill.
I'm going to go back to my theory that this really is a question of which candidate positions himself as the best conservative Washington outsider. And two people I'd look at with regard to this are, number one, Scott Walker, the governor of Wisconsin, who just seems to be best designed for this. And if you look at the early primary stops, he seems in the best position to do well in those early stages. But the other person I'd look at would be Jeb Bush. The question is, can he position himself as this? Because Jeb, on the one hand, he's a former governor of Florida. He's not part of Washington. On the other hand, he has the last name, and he's, for better or for worse, seen as part of the establishment. And so for some of these, frustrated voters, he might be seen as part of the problem. So can he in effect rebrand himself that way?
What about John Kasich? He also ran for president back in 2000 here and campaigned here in the area. Right. I was with him. Here, it's his state, Ohio. This is a must-win state for Republicans.
Right. So now we're getting into the tactic of the race, and there are some candidates who will do everything they can to prevail in Iowa. There are other candidates who will do everything they can to prevail in New Hampshire, and that's Kasich in particular and Chris Christie. That's sort of the beginning and end of their campaigns right there.
Is it, so what ends up happening, you think, in the debate? You're talking about the best positioned person. Scott Walker does have a coherent message, it seems to me. I'm not sure I could say the same thing about Jeb Bush or any number of these other guys. I mean, Scott Walker's record in his home state gives him a profile based around a key issue, which is, I don't like unions, I don't like public employee unions, which I think is a broad message with a broad appeal.
Okay, first thing is, I think as with many matters in the Republican Party, Republicans are at the mercy of Roger Ailes and the good people at Fox News in terms of what questions they direct to candidates. They have a choice. Am I going to ask Trump softball questions, hard policy questions, inflammatory questions? And then when I go to these individual candidates, am I going to ask policy questions, gotcha questions, trick questions to try to draw Trump into it? So that's question number one. I think, though, it's a Trump-centric debate, plain and simple. It's going to be the hook you guys are going to ride off of what did Trump do, what he didn't do, how the other candidates handle themselves, and ultimately how to Trump himself.
Can I ask a question about Marco Rubio? I say this as a Democrat who looks at that big field and is most concerned if Rubio were to be the nominee, because I don't like the contrast of Hillary Clinton and somebody who would be a very new, fresh face, energetic kind of a candidate whose policies are very far to the right. But can he break in or break out, even though he's not a governor? He's a Washington insider, so that goes against your theory, but he is packaged as a candidate who can differentiate from the rest of this huge field.
Yeah, now Barack Obama was able to position himself as a Washington outsider, even though he was a sitting United States senator, so it's doable. The challenge for Rubio, though, in the past couple months is he's just been lost in the sheer numbers of this. It's difficult that he shares geography and a lot of donors with Jeb Bush. It's difficult that he shares ideology with about 3 or 4 other candidates at the same time. I agree with you. If I were Hillary Clinton's people, this is the guy I'd be worried about. There are a lot of consistencies in U.S. presidential politics going back to 1992. One of them is that the younger of the 2 candidates always gets the more popular votes. And he is 24 years younger, I think, than Hillary.
He's a dynamic communicator. He is somebody to watch, but I think overall, this is where he and the other candidates have been washed out by Donald Trump and affected by him. That Latino vote, which Rubio has a chance to bring in, has been woken up by Donald Trump and his rhetoric. And a lot of people feel that this is the man who is going to wake the sleeping giant and bring that Latino vote out in 2016 and not to the favor of the Republicans.
So there are 3 events I would point you to in the next couple months that are worth looking at. One, obviously, is the debate in Cleveland on Thursday. The second one will be the #2 debate at the Reagan Library here in California in September. And then the third event is going to be at the end of September when Congress actually asked to come up with a federal budget. And let's see what Congress does, the Republican Congress does on this. Do they pass an honest-to-goodness budget, or do they pass a continuing resolution? I mention this for the simple reason. CRs is done by Congress, by Republicans do them, drive conservatives crazy. Why? Because it's usually the worst that a legislature can do. They paper over problems, they ignore big problems, they just kick the can down the road.
They don't make big cuts.
And it begs the question among conservative activists, why do we have Congress? What's the use of having power? And that feeds right into the Trump zone of things about why you're angry about Republicans.
No, of course, that's a good open-ended question we could use for another show. Why do we have Congress? You mentioned the Reagan Library.
Yes.
I know both of you had an opportunity to spend time with him over the course of the years. What would he be saying about all this? What would Reagan say? I mean, it's sort of like, what would Jesus do? What would Reagan say? Because first of all, there's his 11th commandment, which he was able to break when he felt it was necessary. But also, these guys are sort of cartoon versions of the conservatism that he defined, which, I mean, you don't tend to think of Reagan as so pragmatic.
I think he'd be horrified. Donald Trump calling John McCain a dummy, I mean, I can't imagine what he'd be saying. This.
Well, the first thing, I remember the old Dean Martin joke where he'd pretend he was drunk and he'd look up at the crowd and say, how all these people get in my room? And I think with 16 other people on the stage, you might have that reaction. I think it'd be interesting to see how Ronald Reagan would be treated inside a Republican primary, because what would they do? Ted Cruz would say, this is the former governor of California who signed the nation's most ambitious abortion law, who raised taxes, who signed the CEQA Act in California. They would probably nickel and dime him to death on being a real conservative. But yeah, Reagan, I think, would be horrified by the 11th commandment being violated. But politics today are not exactly what they were during Ronald Reagan's time.
Well, and that's a really interesting contrast, not only politics, but governance.
Right.
That his approach to governing was probably, the fact that it's gone is one of the reasons people are so frustrated and upset with the way the system's operating now, because he was willing to make deals in service of an ultimate goal. On that profound note, we're going to take another break. Stick around. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Kevin Mullen, Mark Simon, Bill Whalen, Carla Marinucci. We only got a few minutes left. I guess we have to talk about the Democrats.
They're not nearly as interesting.
The thing I want to talk about with Hillary is, what is it with these people that there never seems to be a straight line toward anything? It's like this whole business with her cell phones and her emails. I mean, anybody who's got a cell phone knows it's not that complicated. There always seems to be sort of a zig and a zag to somebody who, under ordinary circumstances, would seem to be very appealing.
Everybody has a kid or knows someone who has a kid who just can't give you the story straight. It's just the first thing they tell you, it's some version of what actually happened. And I'm afraid the Clintons are very much the same way. What they tell you at first glance is really not what actually happened, and so it revolves
the dog ate my emails.
Elaborate pulling out of the truth and bit by bit. But you hit on something key. Here is somebody who is doing something historic. She is going to be the first major nominee of a major party. She is going to possibly crack the glass ceiling, the ultimate way of becoming president. This is her last campaign, we think. This should be a joyful, historic run. Instead, it's just the opposite. It's not fun to watch on a daily basis to see her out there struggling. Do I need to be conservative or liberal on a given day? To see her people work at the press and sometimes want to be accommodating and sometimes being
this is
just
a big
opposite.
problem. I mean, and they haven't learned on that front either, because that optic of the reporters being lassoed in a rope line. I mean, really? They haven't learned anything from this? Hillary Clinton is coming here next week to the Bay Area to do fundraising. We're not going to get anywhere near her. We don't ever get anywhere
near her. And again, she's never going to be Barack Obama in terms of being as youthful as he was in 2008, in terms of tapping into the concept of hope, in terms of what it meant for national healing and so forth. But again, there is something large and historic potential here that she could be tapping into, but it's the opposite in some respects, and it's a word that Democrats hate to hear, but there's something very Nixonian to what's going on here, and that it's somebody like Richard Nixon in 1968 running 8 years after having run before and running just sort of a head down, 3 yards in a cloud of dust kind of campaign to get the job without any fund whatsoever.
Unless some of this is get it out of the way now before she is the nominee and we get into 2016 and the focus is the race itself.
You're right, Kim, because it's all about choices. No matter Hillary's problems or whatever, it's all about who she's up against, and if we look at the Republican side now.
But you know what's interesting is you always see her friends quoted in the New York Times and other places saying, "Well, you've never seen the real Hillary. She's a fun person. She's a great person."
Yes, I've heard this a million times.
I got to tell you, I've been in small gatherings with her.
Yeah, I have
She's
too.
immensely charming.
No. I mean, and also a very talented communicator. Can really hit it out of the park.
In a way that you never see in a campaign context. It's one of those great disconnects I've never quite understood.
So the question is, why don't the American people see this? How has she not been able to figure this out? All the smart people around her and all that. It's just a great riddle. How she just doesn't seem to have the same pixie dust that her husband does.
The Democrats have got to be sweating it because her favorability ratings now are at a historic low. And this week, Bernie Sanders had meetups all over the country, 100,000 new volunteers. He had hundreds of those meetups in the Bay Area alone.
Yeah, I do think
what's going on there?
Yeah, Kevin can speak to the Democratic situation better than me, but I do think there are three people worth watching in the next few months to see if her polls continue to go soft. One is obviously the vice president, because he would potentially have the ability to raise money and be a contender. The second, if we're going to use the Gene McCarthy analogy that Bernie Sanders is doing what McCarthy did in '68, it would be Elizabeth Warren. And the third person will be, after he gets a Nobel Prize nomination for Iran, would be John Kerry. Those are probably the only three national stature Democrats who could possibly.
And John Kerry, you can take out of the picture because they're not going to go back to him. But Biden is interesting, and it was interesting when he was in the Bay Area recently. How far they kept us away from him.
Which is, again,
everything was closed.
And again, he's somebody who can be immensely charming.
Absolutely. And the only thing I could think of is, why are they protecting him from us? Who knows?
And I'm surprised the name Al Gore hasn't resurfaced somewhere in the conversation here. And I like to kind of talk to people who aren't in politics to kind of get a feel for what real people are thinking about. And I've had a number of folks express concern about Hillary, that they think that somehow the balloon's going to pop, she's going to implode. I'm not convinced of that yet, but it will be interesting if a Biden starts making noise, who's just kind of waiting in the wings here to see if if those other big candidates jump in. That's a real sign that we've got a troubled nominee.
What do you make of the Bernie Sanders phenomenon? What is there to make of that?
I've interviewed him. He's a delight to interview because he comes in with no entourage. He just says what he thinks. He is sort of like your uncle, your favorite uncle at the Thanksgiving dinner. He sold out the Commonwealth Club in maybe 2 seconds here in the Bay Area recently.
Faster than Kim Kardashian?
Yeah, yes. So what does it say? Once again, there's a parallel with Trump. People like the plain spoken. They're tired of the spin.
Is he sort of the Democrats' John McCain from the Straight Talk Express?
Well, I think part of the Clintons have always had a rocky relationship with progressives in his presidency, things like signing the Defense of Marriage Act and so forth. But there is a movement among Republicans to get Donald Trump to sign a piece of paper saying that you agree to support the Republican nominee. Kevin, why don't the Democrats pass a resolution saying that if you're going to get the party's nomination, you have to be a registered Democrat? I mean, it's kind of the old Groucho Marx joke about, I wouldn't join a club that wouldn't have me as a member. But
I'm a registered Democrat.
But he's not a registered Democrat. How can he be running it?
But is he strictly an insurgent? He's not at any risk of getting the nomination, or is he?
I think he's a great example of somebody who could do real damage to her in New Hampshire. Why? Because he's next door in Vermont, and the New Hampshire primaries is quirky beast where both party members and independents can vote, and he could embarrass her. I worked for the elder George Bush in 1992. Bat Buchanan got over 40% of the vote in New Hampshire. It was horrifying. He tapped into something, but Buchanan never had the juice to go.
Or he could make her a better candidate.
I got to stop both of you there as much as I don't want to. We're out of time. Bill Whalen, Carla Marinucci, thanks for being with us. I'm Mark Simon.
And I'm Kevin Mullen.
Thanks for being with us on The Game, and join us next time.